because I started reading my business like it was a science problem. I started pulling the story out of the data and tracking the systems that were in place, and asking if then hypothesis questions. Hey, if I change this of the operations, how is this going to affect my profit margin? And kind of through that trial and error over the span of about a year or so, we grew by almost 150%. Like that was a huge number once we started to transform kind of these abstract revenue pieces into very easy to understand like daily action steps.
Welcome to the Tech Cast, where we bring you all things science, engineering, technology, and innovation. Today's guest is Dan Bamper, a chemist turned CFO, martial artist, and the founder of Black Belt Ledgers. Dan is a profit coach who helps contractors and trade business owners doing over $1 million in revenue finally get control of their finance, install systems that drive profitability, and start paying themselves like real CEOs. After scaling his own martial arts school by $150,000 using financial frameworks he built from scratch, Dan left his six-figure government job and launched a CFO firm that now helps contractors reclaim hidden profits, fix their cash flow chaos, and grow with confidence. His clients have saved six figures in taxes, added $100,000 plus in profits, and eliminated the stress of not knowing where the money is going. Dan brings a chemist's eye for data, a teacher's gift for making hard stuff simple, and a martial artist's discipline for execution. So, Dan, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah. So, we'll dive in now. So, Dan, you've got a PhD in chemistry, and now you're a CFO for trades and construction companies. How did that transition happen? I mean, what's the real story behind that pivot?
That's a good question. I moved, when I started grad school, I was like, I think I originally thought I wanted to do like drug design and new synthesis from that aspect, and ended up absolutely hating it. So I ended up working in materials chemistry from kind of an organic polymer synthesis perspective. Started my martial arts school right around the same time I was writing my thesis. That kind of pushed me into the teaching industry so I could have a day job to make ends meet. After that, ended up kind of getting a little burned out during COVID and started applying to physical science jobs for the government, where I started working for the Department of Energy. And so they brought me on to help with the nuclear waste characterization programs for a repository in southeast New Mexico called the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant, or WIP. And so that was an awesome experience. And when I landed it at the time, I was like, this is my dream job, because it's a technical aspect where I was brought in a lot for like chemical compatibility evaluations and ensuring that program was adequately implemented to align with like Resource Conservation and Recovery Act standards here in the US, as well as any other regulations from like state Department of Transportation, any regionality, municipality, that kind of thing. And so I transitioned from being a teacher into being a large operations kind of programs oversight person. It was nice because I got to serve as the kind of the technical expert on the chemistry side for the field office I worked with. And the main mission for WIP is to pretty much clean up the country. A lot of the legacy waste that's left over from like the Manhattan Project was just kind of dumped in these trenches all over the place. And the government was like, it's finally time to clean these up. And so that's really what the mission of WIP was and still is to clean up nuclear waste from across the country. And I found that I really enjoyed it. And over time though, the newness wore off of it. And I was like, you know what? I really don't think this is how I want to spend the rest of my life. Was in the nuclear waste world. And so I was like, you know what? I've got a business. We've recently overhauled some things. And I started, and the reason that whole business overhaul happened is because I started treating my business like it was a science problem. I started pulling the story out of the data and tracking the systems that were in place, and asking, if then hypothesis questions. Hey, if I change this of the operations, how is this going to affect my profit margin? Um, and kind of through that trial and error over the span of about a year or so, we grew by almost 150%. Like that was a huge number once we started to transform kind of these abstract revenue pieces into very easy to understand like daily action steps. So, and from there, it's really been taken off probably in the last year or so. We've crystallized things into a nice 6 week transformation offer on the front end, where we help contractors and tradesmen really kind of reclaim a lot of control over their businesses, not only just on the finance side, but also on the stress and operations side as well.
Interesting, Dan. So, was there ever a point where you realized that, okay, I'm pretty much great at science, but money is completely overwhelming me? And if there was, how did you turn the table around?
That's a great question. One of the things that happened in grad school, and something my advisor said a lot, was always go back to the foundations and fundamentals first. So if there's something that didn't work the way you anticipated, or there wasn't a connection between those two variables, go back to your foundations and see what piece of it is that essential building block that's going to help move you forward to your next step and get you around the obstacle. Is it the method of analysis you're using? Is it your experimental techniques? Are you within the right operating ranges on the instruments? What other pieces of the system might be impacting your model? And so by taking a look at those same questions, I realized that I didn't have the foundations of accounting and bookkeeping. And that was my first big step, was say, well, I can't go back to fundamentals because I don't have them. And I was like, great, let's go learn. So I bought some textbooks. I took some classes online and really learned kind of the foundational accounting principles. And once I understood how those reports were generated and the way the data was sorted and what changes were reflected in different areas of the business, it came down to, oh, okay, I understand this now. And once I had that moment of understanding, the model and the data set all of a sudden became a story, just like they did in the science lab. We started to recognize, hey, all of the things we're tracking on our financials are reactive. They happen after the fact. Well, this is the result we get to. All right, let's track that back one step. Let's say, great, well, this is the revenue. Here's the total number of students we have, and here's what they're paying. Well, here's how new people become students. Here's how current students renew. And we started to isolate and segregate the different ways our business made money so we could start to identify the main factors that went into building the money model. And it said, if we understand the steps we need to do every day and the numbers we have to track on the front end to strategize, we can control the result of the money. And so by starting to connect some of those things together, we said, yes, here are the direct connections between the variables. Here's the models that prove it. And here's the numbers we track to make sure things stay in place.
Interesting. So, does your background in chemistry give you any advantage as a CFO? If it does, then I mean, what advantage does it give?
I think it definitely does bring an edge. I don't know if you've ever had the pleasure of talking to a CPA or an accountant or, a financial specialist. They do not do a great job of telling you and breaking it down for you on that level, I should say. And there are a lot, don't get me wrong, there are a lot of financial professionals who are really good at what they do technically. But just like a lot of good scientists, they're not great. They're not always great people wise. Um, you know, Scientists often have a bad rap for not having people skills and not knowing how to tell stories and connect with others. Um, but that's actually one thing I learned how to do in grad school, was to be a lot more personable and make the connection with your audience so you can convey what you're trying to convey. And definitely, the teaching experience I have from grad school was a great way to help with that. And when you come in with a chemist perspective, you also come in with a chemist data processing skills and their ability to tell a story. And all of a sudden, when you talk to business owners and tell them a story, instead of, hey, well, here's your revenue, here's your cost of goods sold, here's your OpEx. You start using language they don't understand, they can't understand the story. And so, as a chemist who happened to learn how to do accounting, I still have all my same storytelling skills, but there's also a greater degree of empathy because I was in the exact same spot my ideal clients were when they didn't have that same ability or that same foundational understanding.
That's interesting. So tell us, what's a STEM skill, like the likes of statistical analysis, prototyping, etc., that translates shockingly well into business and finance?
Uh, Man, that's a good one. And usually when it comes down to like the STEM side of things, there is a framework that comes in place. Like, hey, here's the theory and the model and the math that backs it up. Here is a prototype, and we're going to do a preliminary data collection during this prototyping phase. And then after the prototype comes in, we refine and we make improvements. And then we release the next version. And that constantly happens because there's the one thing that I found is a little bit different on the finance side versus on the science side is that every single client has their own kind of persnickety needs. Every single business has their own unique needs that aren't exactly the same as the previous system. And so while you can apply the same frameworks, you may not be able to use the same story template over and over again. And so when it comes down to it, I find that I'm always having to implement that that process iteration of here's the theory, here's the math that backs it up. Let's build the prototype. Let's collect some data about the prototype and how well it works, and then take that feedback to build actionable improvements. And taking that scientist iterative approach is, I think, one of the most powerful things that I have in my toolbox on the finance side, because it's almost like I help business owners build a custom story for what they need.
That's great. So, Dan, you worked with contractors doing over 1 million a year, but still feel broke. I mean, what's really going on behind the scenes in these businesses?
That's a great question. And that's always a loaded answer. But usually, the biggest thing that I'm finding is that people aren't valuing themselves or their services the right way. The other thing that happens is, you know, there's a lot of emotion that gets connected to money to begin with, because, a lot of folks recognize that, money isn't the root of all happiness by any means, but it is the way to a comfortable life. And one thing that, especially here in the States, people are always striving for is like, maybe let's go get another job. Let's make more money. Let's buy this new thing to have it. And a lot of that comes with people into owning a business. And when they have some of those habits that come with them, they don't always stop to think about the rest of what goes on. And so what that means is, hey, I'm so concerned about landing this next job that comes up, I'm going to underbid it by, 10%. Well, all of a sudden that 10% was your profit margin. And so by going through and trying to underbid and just get the job without worrying about if it's the right job or not is oftentimes one of the biggest trap my contractors fall into. So usually I'd say it just comes down to they're underpricing or they aren't keeping track and just kind of following up the whole cycle on the diligence or collecting data or reviewing data to make sure they're staying on track.
Engineers optimize systems for efficiency. So, what's the first inefficiency that you'd face in a business making over 1 million per year, but yet still living paycheck to paycheck?
The biggest thing that I would start tracking and the biggest inefficiency to look at is how much you're spending, because spending is always a fix you have some degree of control over. And so what that means is, usually when you're running a job, there's the money you get paid to do the job, and then there's the money it costs you to actually execute it and make it happen.
Yeah,
So does that make sense?
yeah, it does.
Yeah. And so when you go in with it and you're like, hey, here is um I made $70,000 on this one, new construction job. That's awesome. But did you realize that the equipment rental you budgeted 5,000 for actually cost you 7,000? That your labor was, 10,000 over where you wanted it to be because you guys had to make all these extra trips that they weren't planning for, and that you overspent on materials by $5,000. So by starting to track that one inefficiency of keeping track of how much you make and spend on every single job really can give you that clarity to help fix that first inefficiency, or at least help you diagnose where the main issues are.
So, what's the difference, or what's one difference between a contractor who scales profitably and one who just scales into their chaos?
It is data. And so usually the ones that are scaling profitably are the ones that have their financial reports ready. They're the ones that can find the information very quickly on how many jobs they closed this week, or how many leads they spoke to this week. How many people called them up to say, "Hey, can you come out and give me an estimate to get my AC fixed or to get a new sewer line installed?" And so I would say that's always the big key, is the ones that scale profitably know their numbers. And not just they look at their financial reports, but they understand them, and they keep an eye on their margins. They keep an eye on how much they're spending on materials and labor. They're mindful of, what they pay for facility rent every month, credit card payments, and managing their payment and collection terms. Like, they can assign a value to every area of their business. And usually the ones that are a lot more chaotic are just like, yes, okay, we'll do it. Let's go. Pump the brakes for a minute, bud. Like, we got to make sure that the job you're setting up for, or the job you're willing to do, is the right job that's going to help you. Because there are some folks where they don't need big overhead margins, because maybe they're just a single truck that's running, and it's their own truck that they've had for the last 5 years. Whereas, if you're a crew running 10, 15 trucks on it, not every job's the job that you want.
I guess data is important in every field after all. Yeah, and it's important in finance, can definitely not be overstated. So, you often say it's not a spending problem, it's a systems problem. Can you explain what that really means for someone running a service business?
Yeah. Um, so usually when it comes down to like service-based businesses, there will always be a cost associated with doing business, right? That's why it has its own dedicated section on the profit and loss report. There's a whole section dedicated to what it cost you to make the product or build it or deliver it. So, usually when it comes down to it, like, you have to spend money. And that's not a problem. That's part of who you are as a business. Any business has to spend money, whether it's a martial arts school where they have to pay an instructor to be in there to teach their classes, whether it is a retail shop where they have to pay an hourly employee, or they have to pay for the goods that they're reselling, or even if it's, the cute kids lemonade stand down the street, they still have to buy the lemons, the sugar, the water, and invest the time to make their product before it can be sold. So it's very rarely that spending is a problem, because spending is a part of existence. And usually what happens though is, if you don't have systems in place to help you monitor your spending, make sure you're spending the right amount, or even systems in place to make sure that you're getting paid on time, it you got to make sure that your systems in place are supporting what you're doing. And those can be systems from something super simple as making sure that your client actually pays you after you do the work, or a system that helps you track the profits associated with every single job. You've got to make sure you have the right tools and systems in place to make sure everything functions.
That is great. So, tell us, AI is hyped for everything nowadays. Are there ways that it could actually help small businesses with finance? If there are, then where does it flop? I mean, where does its limits reaches?
Yeah. Uh, Wow, that's a good one. AI arguably is one of the most powerful assets you can have in helping you understand finance. So instead of just going to Chat GPT and saying like, "Hey, give me a restaurant that's close by," or tell me about maybe the new legislation or the new tariffs that are in place for this week. You can go to AI and say, "Hey, pretend that pretend that I'm completely uneducated in the ways of finance. Give me everything I need to know about reading a financial report in 2 pages or less." And AI can be a really great teacher to help you empower yourself to take control of that. Um, as a former teacher, I will say math education is one of those things where I don't think the system works the way it needs to. And I often see a lot of folks just look at me and go, "I'm really bad at math." No, you're not bad at math. You're an electrician. You're really good at math. You use it every day. Like, you're not bad at math. It's a matter of not having the education you needed to make the story to have. And so AI can not only be a powerful tool for like, tell me everything I need to know about finances, but it can be, hey, when I'm looking at this, you know, I my total revenue for last month was $10,000. I spent $5,000 in labor and $2,000 in materials. Is this where my business should be? And all of a sudden, that can give, especially new contractors, a lot of insight into how well their business is doing, and even some actionable steps to put in place to make happen. Like, AI can definitely step in and help be the role of like a financial advisor. It can also help you with, kind of identifying who your competition is. If you're looking to build a new website, you can say, "Hey, find 5 electricians in my city and tell me what makes their websites really strong." And it'll go through and it'll give you information about, hey, on their website, they all seem to follow the same structure, or they're optimized for these different keywords accordingly. AI is arguably one of the most powerful tools in there for small business. And as far as limitations go, though, it's good, but it's not perfect. It's definitely not perfect. And it's because it's a what's called a large, it's a large language model. It pulls what other people are posting on the internet to help, determine how reliable it is. And usually search engine rankings are something that impact AI and its accuracy. So whenever I ask AI to do some research for me, one thing that helps me get a better grasp on the validity of the statement is cite your sources. Tell me where you found this information and evaluate if it's correct. What makes you think it's correct? And you kind of start to challenge and push back a little bit.
That's a really valuable tip. I think I'll go try that out myself to see how it
Yeah.
goes. All right. So tell us, if you could automate one financial task for every founder, what would it be?
That's a good question. Depending on the stage of their business, like for new founders, when they're launching, when they're, maybe still kind of growing a little bit, they're under about 10, 15, 20,000 a month. One thing that I would love for them to automate is upload their profit and loss to AI and say, "Hey, here's my profit and loss. Tell me the story of my business."
Hmm.
And have it spit out like, "Hey, you made this much money this month. Here's how much it cost you to make that money, and you kept this much out of, delivering the product. After that, you spent this much on some of your other operational expenses, and you were left with this much money left. These numbers seem strong, these numbers seem weak," and kind of stepping in to act as a little bit of an automated financial advisor.
That's great. So, Dan, your school community helps contractors stop guessing. So, what's one resource there that would help an engineer turned founder today?
That honestly, I would say the one thing that's in there is the pricing calculator that I have. So I have I've worked with a lot of contractors and trades that have done both, residential service and construction jobs and have a pretty good grasp on everything that goes into a job. And the one thing that I think that's in there is the estimating tool. Because again, the biggest thing that I see is that folks are undercutting themselves a lot to win the job. And I understand the necessity of that because it's reality. It goes to say, do I want to price for 20% profit? Absolutely I do. But on a job that's $125,000 invoice, you can't do that because you're going to be underbid by your competition and not even land the job to begin with. And so this pricing calculator that I have in there not only estimates, gives you a good estimation for shop labor, field labor, your materials and your markup, as well as any, subcontractors, equipment rental, everything that you're going to need to deliver the job, gives you a great way to help price it and mark it up. So you can kind of dial those numbers in and start to see, hey, here's what it's going to cost me to do this. This is how much wiggle room I have when it comes to my pricing. But appreciate where most of the wiggle room goes away is in your profit margins. Because going into business, I don't know anybody that goes into business who, you know, not that they don't have a purpose, but one of those purposes is always to help make a little bit more money for themselves and get the freedom they want when they're not working for somebody else. So I think probably the estimator tool that's in there is arguably one of the most helpful pieces that's there because if you can help control the amount of money that comes into your business and irk that up a little bit more each time, it's way easier to start planning on what spending you can cut when there's actually money to spend.
All right. So tell us if an engineer turned founder listening right now wants to get out of financial chaos and into control. So, what are the first three moves that you would have them make today?
Move number one would be take a look at your books and make sure that your bookkeeping is up to date. Make sure that your bookkeeper is doing the things that you need them to do. They should be delivering your reports every month, and they should also be giving you a little bit of information like, hey, you made a profit, you didn't make profit this month. Um, the second thing is to create like a monthly financial review ritual. And that's where when you get these reports, you got to do something with them because there's no point in having a report if you don't read it and leverage it. So if someone comes in every month and says, "Great, I'm going to take a look at, all of the spending in my business as a percentage of revenue and see what aligns with target and what's off target." Just that 30-minute process can be something that can help you start making those moves and give you a way bigger strategy. And so if all of a sudden you're looking, well, I had a $100,000 month, but I walked away with $2,000 in profit or negative 5,000, right? You ended up losing money on the job. Like that's a problem. But you can't just look at the before and after. You got to start digging apart in each of the areas. And so one of the things that I always recommend doing is in that monthly ritual, sit down and say, great, my materials were, 20%, labor was 40%, subcontractors were 10%, and set target margins for what they should be and compare them to what you have. And then lastly, like get a professional to help because usually if somebody's large enough where they have $100,000 month, they shouldn't be in the weeds dealing with the financial side because that's too big of a data set for them to handle on their own with a couple simple questions. There's not only analysis, what's called a vertical analysis, where you take a look at everything as a percentage of revenue. You've also got a horizontal analysis to make sure that things are consistent. And then on top of all of that, usually, contractors and trades are famous for 30, 60, 90-day payment terms on both vendors and clients. So having to navigate all of those ins and outs when, you've also got to balance getting your guys on the right crew or on the right job every day. You've got to make sure you have enough money to do payroll. You've got to make sure that your bills are paid. You've got to make sure that your vendors are up to date. There's other clients that are calling to say, hey, this work wasn't done up to snuff, man. Get over here. You didn't pass inspection. They have things to be worried about in their everyday life that aren't their finances. And usually that's the one thing that gets put by the wayside because of it. So I always recommend outsourcing to a professional.
Those are great, great, great tips you gave there. So there's one more question, Dan. I personally like to save this one for the last to ask every guest I interview here on this show. So tell us, what does innovation mean to you and how it relates to your field?
Oftentimes, the innovation side of things I found doesn't come from the method of analysis. It doesn't come from a new tool. I find that innovation in my industry is the way you get people to buy in. And I don't just mean with money. I mean like emotionally and intellectually buying in too. It's all innovation is always about how can I build that next connection that's going to help my client accept the advice I'm giving and implement the changes that are going to benefit them long term. One of the biggest things that people come back with is like, hey, don't want to um, I don't want to do this. It's new, it's scary, I don't have time to implement it, things of that nature. And when you take the time though to really sit down and invest with that client and say, look, you know, the idea of job costing and tracking, job by profitability by job is not anything new. But if you can find the innovation to adapt it and deliver a system that's going to work for the way they work and be flexible enough to create the piece that's going to work best for them on the fly, I think that's the innovation that comes from my industry these days. It's always about innovating the new way to get a yes instead of innovating the new product.
That is great. So finally, tell us where's the best place for people to connect with you?
Honestly, they can connect with me on Facebook or Instagram. Every week, I feature a video called a Money Minute, where there's a small little tidbit of financial nuggets and gems that have really made an impact to me, and a fun story that goes with them. And we do all that in 60 seconds or less to kind of showcase the importance of finance inside your business. The other thing is they can reach out to me directly on my website, blackbeltledgers.com, and they can schedule a free profit leak inspection with me where I will sit down with them and go over the reports one at a time and ask them some questions about the systems and behaviors inside their business. And they'll also walk away with a comprehensive action plan on what to do next. That way they can say, hey, install job costing. You need some help with that? We can engage us. We can make that happen too. But we'll usually kind of sit down, pick everything about the business apart, and offer almost like a doctor's diagnosis for them.
So you mentioned that people can reach out to you on Facebook and Instagram, but you
Hmm.
haven't given us your Facebook username or your Instagram handle.
The Instagram handle is at Black Belt Ledgers. And if they search Black Belt Ledgers on Facebook, I'll come up right away.
All right, Dan, it's been a wonderful conversation with you.
Yeah, thanks, Ezekiel. It was nice to meet you.